We're at the middle ground now. 3 themes done, and we're on to the 4th. Grace upends your world. We picked rocks every spring on our farm. For a week, we walked through the fields, picking up the rocks too big to ignore for another year. It was simple, dull work. My mother said that if after 5 minutes there was anything about picking rocks that either amused you or confused you, there was something wrong with you. The only excitement came when we had to crowbar a big rock onto a stone boat. Lift up the rock with 6-foot-long crowbars. Work your way around it until you get the rock out of the hole and flipped onto the stone boat. But there was one problem. The rock didn't want to move. While you're prying that rock up, if that crowbar slips just once, where's that rock going to go? Right back into the hole. We're these rocks. God's grace comes to biblical people and to us with wonderful promises. God is taking us to a new home and is lifting us up. But we're rocks. Often we respond to grace by falling into the same rut we've been in. It's a wonder that God even bothers to give His grace. Yet He does. He turns Jonah around and brings him back to Nineveh. He stiffens the backbone of Gideon, answers his questions, and calms his doubts. He makes the murdering Pharisee Saul into the greatest missionary of the first century. Grace upends the world. This theme balances our last one in place of us all, which put us into the background while another stood up for us entirely alone. Now it's time to swing the pendulum and focus a bit more on us, as the promises of God's grace turn our world upside down. The power is all still in God's grace, as there's nothing we can do to bring those promises to us in the first place. But we can rebel against His grace. People are wandering rocks looking for a better rut. So we'll see the patience of God at work again in His patient relationship. We see many biblical cases of rebellion against God's gracious direction. Jonah fears Nineveh and rebelliously flees to the west, only to be buried beneath the waves. The people of Israel hear through Moses that God will set them free from slavery. But first, they must make bricks without straw. Grace has turned their world into a much harder place, and they grumble. When set free, God gives them the gracious meal of manna each day. But again, they rebel against this meal, complaining that it comes every day the same. But this theme of grace can also turn from rebellion to joy. I wrote about Rocky, the stray cat we took in. He was terrified when we first got him, but he soon learned that he would always be safe and loved at our house. He ended up being the best, most loving cat ever. So the grace of God is sometimes received with great caution. God patiently repeated His promises to Moses, Jonah, and Joseph, for example. Only with patience would they learn to trust the surprising grace. But others saw their lives upended and rejoiced in it. Mary, after her meeting with the angel and then traveling quickly to visit Elizabeth, sang the Magnificat in joy. Paul, immediately after regaining his sight in Damascus, preached that Jesus was the Messiah. In the end, this theme is like my uncle who collected rocks. I described how he came to the farm, took ordinary rocks, put them in his rock tumbler, and amazed us with the beauty that was hiding in those rocks. So grace tumbles our lives, just as Mary pondered and tumbled over and over her thoughts Christmas Eve night after the shepherds had left. Mary took these amazing events of the last 9 months and pondered them, turning them over and over, polishing them to reveal the treasure that they were. So this gift of grace that overturns our world welcomes patient polishing. It takes faith to be lifted upward out of our past rut. As God moves us forward, every step is a polishing of our understanding of His grace. In the end, grace comes to upend our world, to show the mercy of God, His uplifting power, and the beauty of His promises. Welcome back. It is time we made the turn to the last three themes. It's time we saw how greatness looks. Bruce Catton described the Civil War general Ulysses Grant this way. The governor of Illinois remembered that he was plain, very plain. And men said that he usually went about camp in a short blue coat and an old slouch hat, wearing nothing that indicated his rank. Nothing, indeed, that even proved he was in the army. There was nothing about Ulysses S. Grant that struck the eye. And this puzzled people after it was all over, because it seemed reasonable that greatness, somewhere along the line, should look like greatness. Grant could never look like anything, and he could never make the things he did look very special. How should greatness appear? Shouldn't greatness look like a spotless uniform with shining medals? Is that the model of biblical greatness? There are certainly moments that shout glory and greatness. But is there another side to God's greatness? There's the hidden greatness that God uses far more than we expect. God can speak with thunder and lightning. Often he prefers to whisper. God can dazzle the shepherds with angels in heaven, but he's found in a stable, lying in a manger. It's the hidden work of God that expresses best the nature of God's relationship with us. The true nature of God comes through the hidden greatness, and with that comes his relationship built on patient faith. Faith hears the whisper of God more clearly than the roar of his thunder. It's the difference between winning a race and walking a child. I described some of our outstanding All-American runners at Concordia University, Wisconsin. The speed of an All-American runner is amazing. Run on a treadmill next to her and watch her fly. But then a few years later, watch the same woman on YouTube as she patiently walks with her 1-year-old daughter. How fast is her pace now? She's a mom, walking with her 1-year-old. And if you ask, she'll tell you those few slow steps holding her daughter's hand are more important than many a race that she won. Where is greatness found? Not just in an All-American sprint to victory, but even more in her patient walk as a mother. God's greatness has both instant speed and patient walking. The greatness we expect with God comes with his first act of instant creation of light, and then the lights of the stars, sun, and moon. Those first moments of light shape our expectation of divine greatness. That's the intense light that Moses finds in the burning bush. Here is the fire that defines the glory of God. This light as glory peaks with Jesus, who identifies himself as the light of the world and who shines like the sun on Transfiguration Day. But the glory that we see through the angels in Christmas is put away through much of the ministry of Jesus. He shaded his light by wearing a coat of humility. I wrote about my old motorcycle coat, faded from red to pink and stained. And yet, that old coat has a greatness earned by 100,000 miles of riding. Not everyone can see the greatness in a dull coat, but in just the right light, God displays a greatness that those with faith can see. Jesus walks calmly and kindly through the crowd outside of Nazareth, even though they want to kill him. He leaves them safely on the hill. His greatness is shown when he did nothing to them. But he will return on another day, outside another town, and go to a hill surrounded by a crowd demanding his death. There, not cast down, but lifted up on the cross, he will show his true glory in the darkness of Good Friday. Our hope is to have the eyes to see that greatness in all its ways. We might want a greatness that dazzles us instantly, but we likely couldn't bear to watch it. But God comes with a gentle light, a caring greatness that tells us his story with a whisper. Lord, let us hear your still voice and give us a patience to see your glory in darkness and light. Now we're down to the last two themes. This is God's unlikely victory as God cures with the illness itself. The little green pot. It's clay rolled into a rope, then circled upward layer by layer. It's too small and rough to be a cup, and besides, there's no handle. It's just a sturdy little green pot. It sits on the shelf in our family room where it's been for some 20 years. This little green pot was our youngest daughter Nicole's gift to her mom on Mother's Day when she was in 3rd grade. It will never win a prize, but it will never lose its place. You made those gifts. Maybe it was a corsage made from 3 kinds of yarn and 4 tangled knots for your mom. And what did your mom say when you brought it home? Your mother looked at the knot corsage and asked, "Did you make this?" And she said, "I'm putting it on right now, and I'm going to wear it to church on Sunday." And she did. I know that this is an ideal story, and perhaps it didn't work out quite that way for you, but let's say this. At our house, the little green rope pot is still on the shelf, and your mother really did wear the knot corsage that Mother's Day. Why? That corsage was more knots than yarn, but it was what Mom did with it and how she chose to see it that made it beautiful. That is a large part of this chapter. We are more knot than yarn, more rough than smooth. But what God does with us is the real story. We are nothing but a nest of knots, not His people, and not deserving His mercy, but He takes our knots and calls us His own. In chapter 7, we explored the ways in which God heals with the illness itself. At times, He works with those who have no idea that they are being used to accomplish His plans. Other times, it will seem that God is increasing the very problem itself, but it will be the increase that becomes the measure of the cure. Perhaps more often, we'll find that God confronts the evil itself and makes it an unwilling cure. In doing this, God transforms the problem, especially the problem person. And in that transformation, the one who was the enemy becomes the ally. At times, God uses the action of someone without any knowledge on their part. Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers, and then rises to become the second in command in Egypt. By this, he saves Egypt, and also his own family from starvation in the 7-year famine. The one who was oppressed became, by that very evil and oppression, the one who saved the oppressors. That's evil that is resolved at a distance. But sometimes evil has to be grasped in the here and now. In the chapter, I described handling rough-cut boards when I was a boy on the farm. There's 2 things about handling those boards. First, grab on and don't let go. The more you move your hand up and down the board to find a place with no slivers, the more slivers you'll get. Second, notice how Dad is carrying the other end of the board. Dad's picking up his end of the board near the middle, while I'm holding on to the last few inches. Of course, holding from near the middle, Dad was carrying much more of the weight. I couldn't see the whole board, but now I know Dad was carrying everything that I couldn't see. Paul's thorn in the flesh is that oak board with all its slivers. Paul's tired of the thorn, and so he asked for it to be removed 3 times. But God said, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." How galling for Satan to see his thorn turned for the glory of God. Remember, when I carried my few inches, Dad carried the board. Now, when you and I have a spiritual sliver, remember the Father's Son who carried the cross and bore the nails. Paul's weakness was filled by God's power, power that could transform a thorn into grace and power. The nails that pierced Jesus seemed to be Satan's victory, but they led to the victory that saved the world. It isn't merely that God waited for evil to exhaust itself. The creativity of God used the evil in itself. The false charges against Jesus weren't cleared away, but were the needed tools that delivered him to the cross. God used the evil intentionally to bring the good he desired. By the sins of the world, he demonstrated his love through the cross. God cured with the illness itself. Now, before you close with prayer and take off, pull out your planning guide and look at when you said you would read for Session 4. Next week, you'll be looking at chapters 8 and 9. God bless your reading as you live out His patience and perfection.